Bethany Good. Welcome to Cobblestone Arts Center. During the week, Monday through Friday, we have a day hab program for adults with disabilities, and I teach movement in this program that we have. We have music classes, art classes, theater classes, and dance or movement classes. Just yesterday, we put on a show on this very stage. We have another one in a couple weeks. And then we have this wonderful stage facility available to the public. We have several concerts coming up in the fall and in the winter. There's a flyer out in the lobby. We have an a cappella show, a fashion show, a holiday voices show. And then we also have a fundraiser in September. It's our Run, Walk, and Roll. So that's a fundraiser for our day hab program. There's also some information out on the table for you if you have any interest in that. We would love to have as many people as possible. But we are happy to welcome all of you here for the show this afternoon. And I would like to introduce Judy Wellman to tell you a little bit more.
All right, can you hear me okay? I work with the 1816 Farmington Quaker Meeting House Museum, which some of you may have driven by to see. It's all closed in right now. It started out as a barn in 1927, and by the early 20th century, it was a total wreck. But we're happy to announce that we recently got a grant from the Historic Preservation Fund for sites relating to equal rights, and it's almost $500,000. And we're beginning restoration in the spring. We're working with the architect for plans and specifications and design right now. So you will see something happen, and we're really looking forward to having a beautiful facility to come visit in the spring. Or we'll start in the spring. It's probably going to take 2 or 3 years to finish. This program this afternoon carries out one of the themes of our meeting house, and we're still waiting. That 3 of the actors are in the same car and they got lost. That's why we're waiting. So we're just trying to reach them and see when they're going to be here. But thought we might get started first. The 1816 Farmington Quaker Meeting House is important because before the Civil War, people associated with that meeting house were very active in movements for equal rights for Native Americans, African Americans, and women. And they were hosting people like Frederick Douglass, who came to speak at that meeting house, or William Wells Brown, or the Edmondson sisters, who some of you may know, who were coming to Farmington as part of the Underground Railroad. They were also very active with Native American Haudenosaunee rights, especially after the 1838 Treaty of Buffalo Creek. And a lot of you may know the story of the Cherokee and the Creeks and the Choctaw from the Southwest that were moved in what people call the Trail of Tears in the summer of 1838 to Oklahoma. About 8,000 people died on that trail. The federal government thought, oh, this is such a good idea, we'll go and do the same thing to the Haudenosaunee. What they didn't reckon with was the Seneca people said, we're not going, we're staying right here. And they came to the Farmington Meeting House and appealed to Quakers to help figure out how best to carry out a national campaign. And they helped with petitions from everywhere, visits to the president, visits to the governor, visits to the Secretary of War, and letters. And they resulted in what they call the Supplementary Treaty of 1842, by which the Senecas lost Buffalo Creek, which they've never regained. They lost Tonawanda, but the Tonawanda people managed to get it back by buying it in 1857. And they kept Allegheny and Cattaraugus. It's the reason that the Haudenosaunee people are the single largest group of Native people today, with east of them that still have their homelands, any remnant of them east of the Mississippi, and are making a real resurgence, as some of you may know if you visited Canandaigua. This group was also very active in women's rights, and you all know the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention, July 19th, 20th, 1848, the first women's rights convention in the country that really initiated the movement for women's rights and women's suffrage. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton is given credit for being the catalyst for that convention, which indeed she was, but it was Quakers who helped her organize it. And they were affiliated with the Farmington meeting, which had space for, they say, 1,000 people from 25 different Quaker meetings across Western New York and Canada. And some of those were in the Waterloo area. And they became very active in helping organize the convention. They're the single largest religious group who signed the Declaration of Sentiments. About a third of the signers are Quakers or affiliated with this meeting house. So, and then they held a second convention in Rochester, August 2nd, 1848, with Amy Post and others, and Frederick Douglass and several African American people. So one of the things we now do is hold meetings around the theme of equal rights, past and present, every year. And so this is one of those about equal rights for African Americans in the past. This commemorates the Women's Equality Day. August 28th, 1920 was the date that the federal government actually approved including the 19th Amendment in the U.S. Constitution, giving women the right to vote. And it's a very simple statement. People think it's must be complicated. It's one of the few government publications that wasn't complicated. It just says that the right of citizens to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the federal government or any state on account of sex. And it was exactly the same wording as the 15th Amendment passed in 1870, which did the same thing, except it said citizens' right to vote shall not be denied on the basis of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. One of the problems has been, we all know what happened in Reconstruction when Reconstruction ended with the right of African American men to vote. And the inclusion of women in 1920 did very little to change the situation of women who were people of color as well. So it wasn't really till the 1965 Voting Rights Act that the federal government stepped in to say, these are part of our Constitution, we're guaranteeing the right of every citizen to vote. Unfortunately, 2013, Selby County v. Holder really eviscerated the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So we are now again struggling with what it means to be a citizen of the United States, and do all citizens have the right to vote? I think Frederick Douglass would be horrified. We've lost 100 years. And so this is a particularly appropriate time to be thinking about what Douglass's position was and where he went and what he would be doing. As we all know, Frederick Douglass was perhaps the best known champion for the rights of people of color in the 19th century, comparable to Martin Luther King in the 20th century. What people don't always realize is that Douglass was profoundly influenced by key women in his life. Some of them were white and some of them were black. Douglass, all his life, called himself a woman's rights man, and he remained so. The day he died, February 20th, 1895, he died in the foyer of his home, having just come back from a women's rights convention in Washington, D.C., where he sat on the stage with Susan B. Anthony. And he came home and was telling his wife about this story, and he collapsed and died. So literally to the end of his life, he remained a women's rights man. But one of the things we forget, and he gave credit to Elizabeth Cady Stanton, whom we met in 1842, and he said, we walked the streets of Boston together, and she convinced me that women's rights was as important as anything. So from that period on, he became a women's rights person. What we often forget is that there were many black women in his life who also profoundly influenced him to take up the cause of women's rights. And that's the story that we're going to hear today. I'd like to introduce Ruth Anderson, who is the director of AKWAABA, which is a fabulous group of volunteers who do tours of African American sites in the Rochester area, and who also do first-person presentations about key people, most of them leaders of color from Western New York. Ruth, can you talk a bit about AKWAABA and
They're
see
here.
Oh, good. And so we're just in time. know what was going on.
For giving that background. And I do apologize, I don't know what happened, but something happened, but they are here. We decided with this particular program that we felt that many people know something about Frederick Douglass, or they think they do. But you don't necessarily know about people in the background who, or maybe the foreground, who had an influence on him. He was not out there doing what he did by himself or without support. So there were women in his life that influenced him in various ways. And you will hear from them today, each individually. There will be 4 women today. And one will be portraying his grandmother. And there isn't really much of anything written about her. So we had to take what we were able to find out and put together a story based on factual material, but us putting it together to give you a sense of what his grandmother, how his grandmother influenced him in his early life as a child. And then next you will meet another woman who was a great influence on him throughout his life, his wife. I guess I should say Anna Marie Douglass, his wife Anna Marie Douglass. So you will meet her, you will hear some about her life and the influence that she had on Frederick Douglass, because they were a team. They worked together. You will also hear from a woman, I know you've all heard something about Harriet Tubman. She had an influence on Douglass and vice versa. And then you will also hear from Sojourner Truth. So you may not have known that those last 2 women did influence him in some way, but as a matter of fact, they did. These women started out, really they're very involved in their own personal family genealogy. And this is just spread. And when we organized in 1996, we decided, after working just with tours of Underground Railroad sites in the Rochester area, we decided that stories needed to be told about the important figures in the Rochester area. And so as we've grown, the women have taken on the personalities of the people that they feel comfortable portraying. As the director, I don't tell them who they should portray. And I think you will find, as you hear from them, that each one of them has picked the right woman for them to portray. So I think they're ready.
All my life. When I was a little girl, it would be my job to grab the water and take it out into the fields and serve the workers. When I got a little older, they taught me how to heal wounds and take care of cuts and bruises. And as a woman, I was taught how to help women birth their babies. And that was pretty much what I did until now. Now I'm old, and the master can't sell me. So he puts me in a cabin way off of the way from the big house. And that's where I live. And my job now is to take care of the youngins just before they have to go to the big house and become slaves. Now they don't know that, only I know that. And so what I do is when they bring them to me as little youngins, I try to teach them everything I know. I teach them how to fish, how to plant food, how to make fish nets, and how to survive pretty much out here in these woods. And prepare them for when they go down to the big house and become a slave forever. Now, it's my job to take them down to the big house. And it's never, never a wonderful journey. No. It's long and sad and dreary. But I have to tell you, that's for me. Because the youngins, they don't know. They don't know what they're getting into or what. They're just following me down to the big house, and they love it because it's a part of the world that they have never seen. Oh, they look around at the horses and all the people and all the work equipment. And I have this one grandson, my daughter Harriet's son, they call Frederick. Frederick is very, very curious. Frederick asks a lot of questions. Grandma, how come it takes food so long to grow? Grandma, how come we didn't catch any fish today? Grandma, how come when you go away for so long? He just asks so many questions. And he learns a lot. He listens and he thinks and he looks. So that boy Frederick of mine, he gonna be something. But all the others, I try everyone, teach everyone everything I know. How to look at the master, not directly in the eyes. No, look down at the ground. But that don't mean you ain't nobody. You just have to do what you have to do to carry on in this world and go on living. So I try to teach them all of this stuff. That boy Frederick, he's something. The day I had to walk him down to the big house, Master asked for him. He said, "It's time for you to take that boy Frederick up." I had to look, shake my head, so he goes down. Now I already told you how curious he is. He ready to go. He don't know what's going on. So he goes down and he's skipping and having a good time. Looking around, Grandma, look at this, Grandma. Look at that. But you know, I can't even look him in the eye. I have to turn my face, turn my head. Because poor boy don't know that he's going to be a slave for the rest of his life. But we go down to the big house. And here's how it works out. My cousin works in the kitchen in the big house. And I sit down at the table and we talk. And we run and tell the little boy, in this case Frederick, go play with the other kids. And he goes off and plays. And when he gets absorbed into this play, that's when I can finally tip out. Sneak away quietly, keeping my eye out, making sure he ain't watching. And then when I make my escape, I go and I walk home. That sad walk all the way home. I'm crying, tears coming down my eyes. Because the world for him will never be the same for me. Never. Then when I get halfway down there, I hear, Grandma! Grandma! Where Grandma? And he starts to cry. And nobody can help him. And that's the painful, most painful part of my job, is to walk away from all my children. Walk away from them and keep on going. Now, Frederick, he's been gone a while. Oh, he's probably maybe, I don't know, 9 or 10 years old. And once in a while, when I go out to help a woman birth her baby, I hear a little bit of news about it. They'll tell me this and tell me that. But the last time I went out to help a woman birth a baby, those that came by to see about her told me that they had sent him off to a place called Baltimore. I don't know how well he's doing. But I know I taught him well, and I taught him good. So I know he'll be all right. He'll be all right. He'll be all right.
Douglass. Perhaps you've heard of my husband, Frederick Douglass. See, I was born in Maryland, Denton, Maryland to be exact. And I was the first one of my parents' children born free. Now, when I turned 17, my sister Charlotte, my sister Elizabeth, and my brother Peter, the three of us, we decided that we were going to leave home for a better life and find work. Well, we ended up in Baltimore. Now, when I got to Baltimore, I found work. You see, that's when I found out that managing a household, that's something I was good at. I worked for two families there. One was the Wells family, and one was the Montel family. And when I worked there, I lived there. So I was able to save some money. And in my travels around Baltimore, I met Frederick. And we became friends and eventually fell in love. Now, Frederick was smart. Show you how smart Frederick was. Frederick had made, and he hated being a slave, you know. Who would want to be a slave? And he had worked out a deal with his master, Mr. All. Said he could work for himself, have his own place, but if he earned over $3, he had to give it to him. He could, no, I got that wrong. Anything over $3 he could keep. So Frederick worked, and he was going to the church camp meetings and everything. Well, one Saturday night, Frederick went to a camp meeting. And the camp meeting got so good, Frederick decided to stay till Monday. Well, now he's supposed to give Mr. All his money on Saturday. When Frederick returned, Mr. All was so upset. He was so angry. And he called Frederick all kind of names. Yeah. Told him he was going to sell it. Told him he was trying to escape. And then he even told Frederick he was going to beat him. Well, I tell you now, we took Mr. All at his word. And three of our friends, and Frederick and me, we started coming up with a plan. Coming up with a plan for him to get his freedom. Now, because I had saved money, I was able to give Frederick the money that I had earned. See, this was our future. And one of our friends loaned him his seaman protection papers, and the other one loaned him the wagon and everything. So that Monday morning, I met Frederick not too far from the train station. I was nervous now. We were scared. Because you know, if the authorities had found out what we were doing, we would have went to jail. We went to prison, and Frederick would have been so further south. So I started praying, but I tell you, I went to work that day. I was so nervous, and Frederick was going to get word back to me when he got to New York City. And he did. When I got word that Frederick had got to New York City, I started packing everything. I packed bed linen, I packed dishes, I packed knives, forks, spoons, everything. I even packed my wedding dress. You want to know what color it was? Plum. A beautiful plum color. As you see, I'm kind of partial to this color. Well, when I got to New York City, Reverend Pennington married us. Yes. Married us. September 15th, 1838. Yes. And you know our friend David, well, he told us we should take a new name. Even told Frederick that it's best if we move to New Bedford because Frederick could find work there. And that's what we did. We moved to New Bedford. Our family started to grow. Frederick was working on the shipyard. I was binding shoes and everything. And then, you know, we even moved to Lynn, Massachusetts. And, you know, I was a part of the anti-slavery society there. The money that we earned, I would even make donations to them. And Frederick started going out making the speeches, telling folks about slavery, telling them it's the devil's work. And when Frederick started traveling. But you see, I want to tell you, folks don't know. Me and Frederick, we're partners. Partners in the struggle. That's what we be, partners. Frederick's job is to go out and make the speeches and tell folks how slavery is wrong. And my job is to keep the house, manage the household, take care of the children. Let me give you an example of my managing the household. Well, we were sitting in the parlor, and me and Fred, because that's what we always would do when Frederick would come home after a trip, and we would go over the things that we needed to take care of, the debts that had been incurred. Well, I got up and I went over to the bureau drawer, and I got the bank book, and I gave it to Frederick. And when Frederick opened that bank book, he saw that I had deposited the money he had sent home. Also deposited money that I had earned, and I had not incurred not one single debt in his absence. He was so proud of me. So managing a household, that's something I'm good at. Now, Frederick wanted to move to Rochester, and you know, as a woman, we do follow our husbands. I would have been just happy living in Lynn, but because we were partners, we came to move to Rochester. Now, when we got to Rochester, we first lived in a tenement house, and then we had the opportunity to buy a home from an abolitionist in Rochester on Alexander Street. For Alexander, I will never forget that address. And it had a porch. It had a yard where I could plant my flowers. Oh, I was so pleased. And we started having visitors. You know, some would stay months. Some would even stay years. But you know, that was my job, to take care of our guests. And you know, we never know when Harriet gonna bring her passengers through. Never know. We have to be ready. So Frederick decided that we should move on a farm out, so folks wouldn't always know what we were doing. And we moved on South Avenue. Oh, we just loved it. And you know, our baby Annie was born when we lived on Alexander Street. That was our only child born in Rochester. She was such a delight. And One of our important guests that came, and we had many important guests to come, was John Brown. And he and my little Annie, they developed such a friendship. She grew quite fond of John Brown. And John Brown, you know, he was trying to get Frederick to help him in his cause. But Frederick decided that making the speeches and going out and telling folks that slavery is wrong, that was something that he was good at. Well, John Brown left, and you know, he went and ended up being hung. Now, my baby Annie, that just hurt her heart. Because Frederick, because of what John Brown had done, Frederick had to leave Rochester. And all of us, the children and I, we were so afraid we didn't know if we would ever see him again. And Annie, beautiful little thing that she is, she wrote her father a letter. And Rosetta read it to me, and she was telling her father all about how the mean men had hung John Brown, and how she could speak German, and the next letter she'd write him, she was going to write it in German. But you know, as time went on, I began to notice that my child was growing weak. And I took her to the doctor, and the doctors had no idea what was really going on. And then, March 13th, 1860, just 4 days before my child would turn 11 years old, God called her home. That was one of the hardest things that I will ever have to endure. But I had no time to grieve. Frederick was out of the country. And it was me. I had to find a place to bury our child. And you know, we had not bought a family plot. We did not have a family plot. But you know, God is so good. One of our friends, the Porters, they allowed us to use one of their family plots. And on the day that we were going to lay Annie to rest in Mount Hope Cemetery, and as we entered the cemetery, the thing that came to my mind was how Annie and her father would take strolls in the cemetery together. But on this day, we were bringing her to her final resting place. And as I look back, I could see all the carriages coming to honor our child. And as you know, losing a child is extremely hard. And something that I never was able to regain the joy for life that I used to have. And 12 years after God had called my little Annie home, someone burned down our home. And again, Frederick was away doing what he knows to do. And it was my job. We had to make sure that everything was safe, that Rosetta and her family was with us, and we had to save as many papers and things that we could of Frederick's. And when Frederick came back home, we we talked about rebuilding our home in Rochester. But after a year, we decided it was best if we made the complete move to Washington. And for me, old Rochester will be home, but it also holds much sadness in my heart. Thank you.
Amen, amen.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. I'm Harriet Tubman. I was born in the state of Maryland. Don't know exactly when, but I was born in that state, beautiful state, a state that was truly kissed by God. But it had a stain again it, stain of slavery. Even though I was born in that state, where some was declared not human, where some were declared not worthy to have their birthday recorded, where some were doomed to work the rest of their lives, where some were beaten with a lash, where some were sold off away from their family. I can still say that I'm blessed.
Amen.
And I'm blessed because God was with me.
Yes.
He's still with me, even to this day. I was born with 3 strikes against me. I was born black. I was born into slavery. And I was born a girl child. There was nothing ahead of me but labor and toil.
Yes.
There was no way that I could say what I want to do and do it. I was not allowed. Everything that I did was because someone else said I could. But I made up in my mind when I was just a little bitty thing that this was not to be so. Even though when I was a youngin', maybe about 6 years old, like I say, I don't know when I was born. And even though I couldn't read or write, was not allowed to do such things, I know that there was something better ahead.
Yes.
When I was just a little thing, I was hired out to work, different jobs, doing different things for different people. was beaten during that time because I couldn't get it quite right. But what 6-year-old can get it right? One of the things I had to do was to check muskrat traps. And muskrats are at their best during the winter. But what I had to do was check the trap to see if any of them was in it. And the trap was set along a water bank. And it was up to me to check. Now in Maryland, there's not much snow. It gets cold. And where I had to check those traps, there's a little thin layer of ice. And I learned to carry with me a little stick so that when I had to go check the traps, I could break the ice. So one day, as I was checking, there was a muskrat caught in a trap. Now I know I had to go get it, because if I didn't, I would get a lashing. So I go up to this water bank, and I break the ice, and I put my foot in it, and then I snatch it back because it's cold. And you know, slave children didn't have clothes like they need to, or shoes like they need to. So I go to the water again, and I stick my foot in and I snatch it back. And I say to myself, I know that I got to get that muskrat out of that trap, because if I don't, I'm going to get a lashing. So I carried with me a burlap bag, so that when I catch it, I can put it in there, because I know that the muskrats will fight, and they will scratch and fight and scratch and fight. But if I put them in the bag, there's nothing they can do. So I go in there and I put them in a bag. And that muskrat, he is fighting and fighting and fighting and scratching. But I have him in this bag. Even though I have him in this bag, he's still fighting and scratching, trying to get free. So I'm standing there looking at this muskrat, fighting and clawing and trying to be free. Sisters, I said, clawing and fighting and trying to be free. So I'm looking at it. You know what I did? I let that muskrat go. Because I know what it feels like to claw and scratch and try to be free. I let it go. Of course, nobody knows that I let it go, because I would have got a lash. But now, I tell you that because I run away from slavery, a young woman, after being beaten and worked and scarred and maimed. I run away. But that wasn't good enough for me. Because let me tell you, when I reached that freedom line, and everything seemed to be changed and different, and I got to where I was in freedom, I still had this feeling of loneliness. Because I didn't have my family with me. So I tell the people who is there to help me out, I'm going back. He said, you going back? If you go back, they're going to catch you. And they're going to put you you in bondage again. I said, but understand this, I'm still not free. Because I don't have my family with me. So I keep going back and bringing them out. I keep going back and bringing them out. And God provided for me some angels to help me along the way.
Amen. Amen.
To help me get from one spot to the next. Now granted, when some of them runaways get tired, hungry, and sick, and scared, they want to go back.
Yes.
And I tell them, you can't go back. If you go back, they get the whipping on you and you'll tell all the secrets of the folks that you know. So I can't let you go back. You gonna go free or you gonna die.
Oh, boy.
One of the angels that God sent to me was Frederick Douglass and his wife Anna. When I come up through Rochester with my passengers on my journey up to Canada, they let me stay and they feed and clothe us. Let us rest up on our journey. Now you know they were taking some chances. Because if anybody find out that they were hiding runaways,
Yes.
they would be in trouble. They were breaking the law. But Freddie, Mr. Douglas, and Miss Anna, they did that for me and my passengers. One of the things that Mr. Douglas did for me was he vouched for me. I'm trying to raise money so that I can help some other people. And this woman, she said, well, I can do some things for you, but whatever the stories that you tell me, somebody had to say that what you're saying is true. So Fred Douglas, he helped me out with that.
All right now.
He said he's going to write a letter for me. And I carry this with me sometime. Mind you, I can't read it. I have to have somebody read it for me.
Hello.
Now, I can't see you all out there. But I know that there's somebody out there that can read this letter for me. If you just do me a favor and come and get this letter and read it for me. Anybody, can you do that for me? So that you can read this letter. If you can, just come on and read this letter for me. I can't see whether there's steps or anything like that. Maybe some steps. Okay. I'm on up and read it. Thank you so much. Yeah, read this letter for me. This letter is from Fred Douglas. He vouched for me.
Rochester, August 29, 1868. Dear Harriet, I am glad to know that the story of your eventful life has been written by a kind lady and that the same is soon to be published. You ask for what you do not need when you call upon me for a word of commendation. I need such words from you far more than you can need them from me, especially where your superior labors and devotion to the cause of the lately enslaved of our own land are known as I know them. The difference between us is very marked. Most that I have done and suffered in the service of our cause has been in public, and I have received much encouragement at every step of the way. You, on the other hand, have labored in a private way. I have wrought in the day, you in the night. I have had the applause of the crowd and the satisfaction that comes of being approved by the multitude, while the most that you have done has been witnessed by a few trembling, scarred, and footsore bondsmen and women whom you have led out of the house of bondage, and whose heartfelt "God bless you" has been your only reward. The midnight sky and the silent stars have been the witness of your devotion to freedom and of your heroism. Excepting John Brown of sacred memory, I know of no one who has willingly encountered more perils and hardships to serve our enslaved people than you have. Much that you have done would seem improbable to those who do not know you as I know you. It is to me a great pleasure and a great privilege to bear testimony to your character and your works, and to say to those to whom you may come that I regard you in every way truthful and trustworthy. Your friend, Frederick Douglass.
All right now. Amen. Amen.
I hold this dear to my heart, just like the angels that God sent to me. God can use you as angels to help somebody else. Because we're all in the struggle together,
Yeah.
whether we know it or not. When one falls, the other surely will.
Yes.
I thank you for the time of listening to old Harriet. I pray that you remember the story that I told you. And I pray that you be the one that God calls to help somebody to their freedom. Like I used to tell my passengers, if you want to be free, you got to keep going. You got to keep your lamps trimmed and burning. That means you got to always be ready when there is a need. And there is a need all the time. Just find out which one you can fill. God bless you, and God keep you.
Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child, a long way from home, a long way from home. To everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under the heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. Now I was born right here in the state of New York. I was born in it and I was a slave in it. I was born right around 1797 in Hurley, Ulster County, New York. My birth name was Isabella. And we were born and owned by some slave owners who were Hardenberg, Dutch speaking. So the only language I knew up until I was about 9 years old was Dutch. That's all I could understand, and that's all I could speak to them. They were the Hardenberg. I had both my parents, my mom and my papa, and had the pleasure after a few years to have a little baby brother named Peter. Now I don't recall the first master, Mr. Johann Hardenberg, but I could remember it just like it was yesteryear. In a cold, damp basement of Mr. Hardenberg's son with other slaves. And we would be in there shivering in the winter and so hot in the summertime that we had to spend our time outside up under the sky. It seemed as though the sun never shined through the little cracks of window pane, and you could hear the slushing of the water that drained from the snow. And we would sit around this little piece of burning wood to keep ourselves warm. Now slavery, me, and slave mothers have a difficult time to imagine that. Because I had about 12 or 13 other siblings, but most of them were sold away. So the only one I knew was my little baby brother Peter. Now in the summertime, when it was hot, my mom, we call her Mama Bet, would sit up under the skies. I call it the heavenly vault, and talk about children who've been taken away, or sold away, or given away. And one night I see my mother as we out there this evening crying low to herself. And I asked her, what's the matter? And she said, there's much the matter. And she's looking up at the stars and said, I'm seeing most of my children taken from me.
Yeah.
But I hope that the same star that I'm looking at, wherever they might be, they can feel the warmth from that star that I'm looking at. Then she commenced to tell us, me and little Peter, stories about our siblings and who was taken away and who was taken in this wagon, and she to see them no more. Well, for too long, young Charles Hardenberg started feeling a little poorly. And I guess Mama Bet knows just what might be coming down. So she's preparing us for whether we are with her or whether we've been taken away. And she tells us that she wants us to work hard, tell the truth, be honest, and don't let them see you crying if you be whipped.
Yes, sir.
Well, so too long. Charles Hardenberg was passed on over to the other side. All his property was divided and sold away. And at 9 years old, me, Isabella, was standing on a block to be sold. Sold away to God knows where. No mama to tell me nothing. My brother Peter was sold off to another part of Hurley, New York. And the first thing I could remember, trying to pray. Then I started praying the prayer that Mama Bet teach me. And before you know it, I was sold not only to some Dutch, but to some English-speaking people for $100. And it seemed as though it was a flock of sheep. Well, that's when I called the war started for little Isabella. Because I could not understand them speaking English, and they could not understand me. So no matter what they asked me to do, as hard as I tried to figure out what they were saying, I would get a lashing on my back. 9 years old, some on my back to this day. But I remember what Mama Beth used to tell me. The only person, only one being, she said, that could help you, and that's God. And I asked Mama, where's God? She said, in the sky. But she tells me to find a place where I feel as though I am being beaten, that I could talk to God.
Yes.
And through the time, I would go off into the woods, way away so they wouldn't hear me when I was crying. And I talked to God and listened for God to tell me something back. But for so too long, as much as I prayed the Lord's Prayer that my mom baptized me, and go and talk to God way off in the woods, I was sold from the English-speaking people to another family, and then another family. Now, Mr. Dumas was the one I stayed with the most. And slavery is mean. They tell you when to get up, when to go over here, who you can love, who you can marry. Couldn't marry nobody at another location. So they point out somebody for me to marry. And that's when I had my children. I worked in that big house, and I worked in the fields too. I could do the work of any man. I had 5 children. But you know, as time comes, and time goes. New York State had these laws. Something about these laws, this country, if it's not a law over here, it's a law over there. And then they amend, they say something about men something there and men something there. And I just wondered, I think about what I hear in the scripture. A time to rend, tear off things, and a time to mend. And I said, why they keep tearing up the law and try to mend the law back together, or mend another law onto this law? Well, New York State had a law that colored people who was born at a certain time would be free at a certain year. Well, Mr. Dumas, and I admired him, for a while I thought he was God, tells me that if I worked extra hard, he would let me go 1 year before New York State grant freedom to colored people. Well, I take him at his word. Mama Bet always tells us to be honest. Don't tell no untruth. Well, when that year comes by, Mr. Dumas, I don't know if he had a change of mind or a change of heart. Well, he did not come to tell Isabella she had her freedom. So I commenced to walk up and ask him when I should get my freedom. Well, he changed his mind and said he couldn't sell me because I had a damaged finger from all this hard work. Well, I'll tell you, I was so angry, but I just called on God. It seemed as though the anger came out of me just like the steam out of a tea kettle. And I went and did all the other work that I thought was fair. Did all the mending, worked in the fields, cleaned the house. And on this particular year, I went to my little place of prayer where I had the branches that covered it, willow trees, right by a little noisy brook of water. And I talked to God. God talked to me. One thing I noticed, when I talk to God, I must wait for God to answer me. So I kept praying to God and wondering when God was going to answer my bargain with God. I said, God, if I was you and you were me, and you prayed and asked me for a favor, for a blessing, I would give it to you. But one morning, as I was getting up to fix the victuals, get things ready, God talked to me, tells me to get up early the next morning before sunup and walk to my freedom. I didn't run. I didn't think that would look right. So I'd already had 5 children, but my little baby Sophie was the youngest one. And I grabbed a few clothing, a few bills, put it in my little knapsack, and I started walking in the direction that God sent me to. And as I got almost above the hill, I said, God, where do you want me to go? And just like that, a house appeared. And I kept on walking and walking. Nobody stopped me to ask where Isabella was going. I ended up with some really good folks. The name was Van Wagon. They were really good Quaker people. They didn't believe in slavery. And I was with them for maybe about a week. For too long, Mr. Dumont comes and asked me, he said, Isabel, why did you run away? Well, you know, I politely tell him, I did not run away. I walked away early.
Amen.
In the morning. So he wanted to take me back. But the Van Wagoner paid him for my time and my little baby Sophie. And I stayed with them. Quiet. They read the Bible. They pray every day. One time, I almost went back. Mr. Dumont comes and said, they're having a big camp meeting, and if I was ready to go back. And I missed that get together.
Yes.
And just as I was getting ready to walk to the back of that wagon, a light appeared.
Yeah.
Just brighter than the sunlight. And it just looked like it kept moving back and forth, like liquid. And I thought I knew it. But every time I said I didn't know it, the light would move further back. But when I felt like I knew it, it came closer to me.
All right now.
See, when I was growing up, my mom Bet told me about God. But she didn't tell me about Jesus. I didn't know about it. But that was that intercessory to stop me from getting on that wagon to go back into slavery. Well, for too long, I got some bad news that my little boy was sold down south. Now, that was against New York state law. You did not, if you had a slave, you could not sell them out of the state. Well, there were a lot of personal ups and downs that Isabella had. But the Van Wagoners, they helped me through. They pointed me out to lawyers. They pointed out where I could get some money to pay the lawyers. And I was able to get my little boy back.
All right.
Even though it was hard. Because they had mistreated him so much. He pretended he didn't even know me.
Oh, Lord.
But I think God must have tapped the judge on the shoulder. Because he could see that mind.
Amen.
It was trauma. Well, as time went on, I don't know, Isabella must have felt that her little boy hadn't been around her that much and needed his mom. And I received some good help there in early New York. Stopped at one church where they were singing, and they allowed me and my little boy to go in. Well, I went back and I talked to my family and tells them that I was going with Miss Whiting to New York City. So I took my little boy Peter with me, and I leave Sophie with my other two daughters and son, and my husband. Well, in New York, we walked the streets, and the free people were just in a mess. But we were trying to get help for them. Then I started working for almost like a private maid for two people who called themselves a prophet. And they was the guard who could come and work. Worked with them for a while, and then I got myself in another predicament. One of them died from, I think, was eating poison, grapes or something.
Yeah.
And they accused Mathis of it. And they said there was a colored woman, and I was the only colored woman in that compound, that's what I called it, was responsible for it. But just like I sued in Hurley to get my boy back, God had put something in here. And I sued them for taking my name and scandalizing it.
All right now.
Well, as the time went on, I don't know, I think things were not that well, not what I thought it should be in New York. My son was giving me trouble. I told him that he was my special child, but I think it was so much trauma from a little boy being beaten so much in Alabama. So we sent him off on a whaling ship, and I felt good about it. He was in and out and causing a whole lot of ruckus, running with the wrong people. But I would go to meetings. After my son Peter went on this whaling ship, one of the deacons at the Zion Church helped me get them on there. And one night, it must have been a good prayer meeting, sister. Because I come home that night, and I don't know what it was, but it was either a deep dream in my deep sleep, or it was God talking to me. And early the next morning, just before 8, I asked God, what do you expect? What do you want me to be? I'm a free woman now. But he tells me, just like you sitting over there, that he wanted me to go east. Well, I was a little nervous about going east. But all this time, I've been talking to God. And God has been talking to me.
Yes.
And when I listen, everything turned out okay. Early the next morning, I get up and I tell Ms. White that I was going to find me a new home and a new name. Well, they thought I was crazy. But I just packed a few things in a knapsack and a few little coins and a little quarter to pay Caesar. And I hopped aboard that ferry over there in Brooklyn. And I started out along Long Island, walking and talking and preaching to the people whoever would listen to me, preaching and singing. And when I would leave this compound, someone would give me a letter to go to the next. And you know, on, I'll say June 1 and 18 and 43, it comes to me just as true as you all are true. My name would be Sojourner Truth.
Yeah.
I was to travel the land and tell the truth from this good book.
Got that right.
I can't read, but I know I could hear and I could see. And like my sister had you to read the letter from Frederick Douglass, I would have people to read this Bible to me. But then I run into a little apartment. See, the grown folks, they want to tell me what it said. But I had the children to read it to me
All right.
over and over again. I didn't need no interpretation from the grown-ups. God tells me what that book is saying, and he puts it here. But I walked along Connecticut, and when I met old Fred Douglass, it was in Massachusetts. It was a place called Northampton Associate. Like-minded people believe in humanity and doing good for people. It seems as though when I heard Douglass speak there with Garrison and some of the others, even the one who helped presented him, I said, this is a smart man. He sort of reminded me of how I would have been. He was a young me when I hear him speak. And then, wasn't too long before he had to leave, but we got a good relationship. And I would go and speak and tell and preach the word and what the truth is as many times as I could. Sometimes they didn't want to hear me, but I'd come up with a song, and I'd sing a song, or I'll come up with a scripture, and even though they say they're Christian, they know it when they hear it, and they would quiet down and listen to what I have to say. I didn't push myself in it. I'd always ask, may I say a few words? And I learned through the years, as I was getting older and had moved to Michigan, learned from Miss Amy Post, right down the road here in Rochester, New York, that old Fred Douglass contributed something to this old lady in monetary funds. Now, we disagree on some things, but we didn't fight. See, I wanted to move all the colored people to Kansas. Douglass couldn't see that. But that was okay. I had a lot of petitions signed, and they never moved all the colored people to Kansas. But I tried. And even though Douglass felt it wasn't a good idea and didn't support it, I love him anyway. And in the end, I know he loved me.
All right.
Because Amy Post said he wanted to help that old lady named Sojourner Truth.
All right.
Now, you know, I said to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under the heaven. There are times when we embrace good things and we have to not embrace them. We might pick up stones. Stones hurt. And sometimes we have to drop those stones. We have to love as war that goes on, but love is much stronger than war.
All right.
Now, I'll be sitting among you. Might not see me in person, but hear them words from old Sojourner Truth.
All right now.
I'll be sitting among you. Might be a whisper, or somebody might say something over there. But every once in a while, somebody will tell you what time of night it is.
All right.
I thank you for your hearing.
The time is drawing nigh. Children, don't get weary. Children, don't get weary. Children, don't get weary till your work is done. Oh, keep your lamps trimmed and burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning. The time is drawing nigh.
We are AKWAABA, the Heritage Associates, and this is Robin Knoll. I'm Shirley Struthers.
Maggie Moore Holly.
Eunice White.
And you met our executive director, Mrs. Ruth Anderson, and Dr. Anderson, our executive, and also Norman Struthers, who's back there with the camera. So we're very pleased that you stayed to hear us. We appreciate your patience. And I don't know if you have any questions or...
We do have some coffee and cake and VIPs out there, so you can meet our esteemed guests, present and past, and have a little bit of social time. And we're so grateful that you all could come and could stay, and we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.